The day I turned 72, my son forgot to call. Not forgot the way you forget to pick up milk on the way home. Forgot the way you forget something that never really mattered to you in the first place. I sat by the phone that whole morning the way I used to sit by the window when he was 16 and had the car out past curfew. That particular kind of waiting that has its own weight, its own sound, like a clock ticking in an empty room. My daughter-in-law did text me around noon, a little emoji of a cake, no words, just the cake. I stared at it for a long time. Then I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter and went to make myself lunch. That was 3 years ago. I should have understood something then. I think some part of me did, the part that goes quiet when something important is happening, the part that files things away for later without telling you. But the other part, the mother part, the part that had driven 40 minutes in a snowstorm to bring him soup when he had the flu at 29 years old. That part wasn't ready to know yet. My name is not important. What I want to tell you happened over the course of about 4 months last winter, and by the time it was over, I understood something about myself that I wish I had understood 40 years earlier. Maybe it would have saved me. Maybe it would have saved my son and me both. I retired from teaching middle school science in Ohio when I was 68, 31 years in the same district. I wasn't rich, not by any stretch, but my late husband had been careful, and I had been careful, and between his life insurance, my pension, and the small house I owned outright, I was comfortable. That's the word I always used, comfortable. Not wealthy, just comfortable. My son moved back to Ohio from Denver 3 years ago with his wife and their 2 kids. My grandchildren, who I loved in that raw, cellular way that grandparents do, like they were made partly from your own bones. He said the cost of living was killing them. He said Denver had gotten impossible. He said he needed a fresh start and home was the right place for it. I was glad. I won't pretend otherwise. I was 69 years old, and I lived alone in a 4-bedroom house, and the sound of it in the evenings was sometimes so complete it felt like a presence of its own. I wanted them close. I wanted to hear small feet on hardwood floors again. They moved into my basement. That was the first thing. It seemed logical at the time. The basement had a full bathroom, a kitchen area my husband had built in the 90s when we thought his mother might come to live with us. 2 rooms, its own entrance from the side yard. I told them it was temporary. My son nodded and said absolutely, just until he got settled at the new job, his wife. I will call her my daughter-in-law because that is what she is, though the word has started to feel complicated. Said she was grateful. She said it sincerely. I believed her then. The job took 3 months to materialize. I paid the groceries during those 3 months. When the job came through, a project manager position at a construction firm in Columbus, I was relieved. I assumed things would shift. They did not shift. My daughter-in-law did not work, and I respected that. Raising 2 children under 7 is not nothing, but she also did not cook, did not clean the common areas we shared, and had strong opinions about how I ran my own kitchen. Once she moved a piece of furniture in my living room while I was at my book club, and when I moved it back, she didn't speak to me for 5 days. I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself I was set in my ways. I told myself all the things women my age have been told to tell themselves when they feel something is wrong in their own home. My son worked the long hours. When he came home, he was tired. I understood that. I did not make demands. When the weekends came and I thought perhaps we might eat together, do something simple, he was usually doing something with his wife and kids. A soccer game, a birthday party for one of the children's classmates. Normal things. I would hear them getting into the car from my bedroom window, and I would find something to do. The money situation evolved the way water finds a crack in concrete, slowly, then all at once. It started with the utilities. They were using the house utilities, and it seemed reasonable that they contribute. My son said, of course. He said he'd set up an automatic transfer. The transfer never came. I mentioned it once, and he said he'd look into it. I did not mention it again. That was my mistake, or one of many. Then my daughter-in-law mentioned the children needed new winter coats. The older one had grown 3 inches since last year. The younger one had a puffy coat with a broken zipper. She said it so casually, the way you mentioned the weather, and I found myself saying I would take them shopping. I did. I spent $460 at the children's clothing store in the mall. My granddaughter hugged me so hard her barrette caught in my hair, and we both laughed. I did not regret a cent of that. But then it was school supplies. Then it was the registration fee for a youth soccer league. Then it was a car repair. My son's truck needed something with the transmission, he said. $2,000, he said, and he was a little short this month. I transferred it from my savings. He would pay me back as soon as things leveled out. They did not level out. I should tell you about Christmas because Christmas was when I first felt something that was more than discomfort, something cooler, harder. My son and his family had their own Christmas in the basement. I was not excluded explicitly. I was simply not included. I understood on Christmas Eve when I heard them opening presents through the floorboards, the children shrieking with delight, that particular sound of a child who is completely happy, that there had been no invitation coming. I had bought gifts for everyone. I had wrapped them and left them under my own tree in the living room. I sat in my recliner on Christmas morning and watched it get light outside, and I thought about my own mother, who had made Christmas feel like she built it with her hands, and I thought about my son at 7 years old in footed pajamas. And I thought about how much time passes and how little of it you understand while you're inside it. My daughter-in-law knocked on my door mid-morning to collect the gifts. She said the kids were excited. She said thank you. She did not invite me down. My son texted me around 2 in the afternoon. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Hope you had a nice morning." I looked at that text for a while. Then I put the phone down and I heated up the soup I had made the day before, and I ate it by myself at the kitchen table, and the house was very quiet. After the New Year, I made an appointment with my accountant, a woman named Shirley who had managed my finances for 15 years and who knew the shape of my life better than most people. I brought in the numbers. What I had been spending, what had come in, what had gone out. Shirley had a way of going still when something concerned her. She went still when she looked at my statement. In 18 months, I had spent $38,000 more than I had budgeted, not on myself, on my son's family, the grocery bills, the children's expenses, the car repair. 3 months of a cell phone plan I was still paying because my son had added himself and his wife when they first moved in and never transitioned off. A week's worth of hotel stay when my daughter-in-law's sister visited from Atlanta and they needed extra space. They had asked if I would stay at a friend's house that week, and I had, because I did not know how to say no in a way that wouldn't start a war. $38,000 in 18 months. Shirley did not tell me what to do. She was too professional for that. But she set down her pen and folded her hands and said, "Rose, what do you want your next 5 years to look like?" I drove home slowly. The roads had patches of ice, and the light was the flat gray light of January in Ohio, the kind that makes everything look like a copy of something that was once more vivid. I thought about what I wanted my next 5 years to look like. I had not been asked that question, or asked it of myself, in a very long time. I decided to start listening. Not to my son's excuses, not to my daughter-in-law's silences. I started listening to myself, the thing I had been filing away. What I heard was not pleasant. The thing about being taken advantage of by someone you love is that you spend a great deal of energy explaining it away. You know the person. You know they are not, at their core, a bad person. Your son is not a bad person. He is someone who learned over years that his mother would not say no, and that knowledge had settled into him the way a habit settles, without his even noticing, perhaps. Without yours. That is what I sat with through January. Not anger, though anger came later. Something quieter first. A kind of accounting of what I had allowed, of where I had taught him that I was optional. I remember exactly when it shifted for me. It was a Tuesday evening in late January, and I had made a pot roast, a real one, the kind that takes all afternoon, with carrots and potatoes and the particular smell that means warmth and someone bothered. I had made it for all of us. I set the table for 6, got out the good dishes, put a candle in the middle. I knocked on the basement door at 6 o'clock. My daughter-in-law answered. She was in her coat. They were going out, she said, a friend's birthday. She'd meant to text me. She smiled in the way that does not reach the eyes and said the pot roast smelled amazing. Then she closed the door. I heard them leave, the side door, the car doors, the engine. Quiet. I went back to my kitchen and I stood at the stove and I looked at that pot roast for a long minute. Then I took out a container, packed it up, put it in the refrigerator, turned off the kitchen light, and went to sit in the living room in the dark. I was not crying. That was the thing. I thought I might cry, but I didn't. I felt instead a kind of clarity that I had not felt in a long time. Like something that had been blurry had gone sharp. I thought about all the times I had folded myself smaller so they could be comfortable. I thought about my Christmas morning alone and my birthday cake emoji and the $38,000. I thought about my husband, who had been a calm and deliberate man, who used to say that the way people treat you is partly a thing they do and partly a thing you allow. I had not thought about that in years. I thought about it now. I went to my desk. I am organized by nature. 31 years of teaching will do that to you, and I keep files. Folders, actual paper folders, labeled and sorted. I found the one that held the cell phone account information, the records of the money I had lent my son, the utility setup, the documentation from Shirley. I sat down with a legal pad and I wrote things out slowly. What I was owed, what I was no longer willing to provide, what would change, in what order. I did not do it in anger. I want to be clear about that. I did it the way I used to prepare a lesson plan, methodically, with the end goal in sight. The goal was not to punish. The goal was to stop teaching the wrong lesson. Over the next 2 weeks, I made phone calls. The cell phone account, I called the carrier, removed my son and daughter-in-law from the plan and mailed them a note, an actual paper note, letting them know their lines had been separated off and they would need to set up their own account. I included the date it would take effect. 2 weeks' notice. I was not unkind about it. My son called me 40 minutes after I mailed the note. He said there must be a mistake. I said there was no mistake. He said they were in the middle of things and this was bad timing. I said I understood that and that 2 weeks was enough time to sort it out. He said, "Mom," in a certain tone. I said I loved him and I had to go. I hung up. The financial support, I wrote a letter. I am a better writer than talker when it matters, and this mattered. I detailed what I had covered in the past 18 months. I asked for a repayment plan for the significant amounts, for the smaller things, groceries, children's clothes. I wrote those off. I wasn't going to war over barrettes and soccer cleats. But the $2,000 for the truck, a $1,500 dental bill for my daughter-in-law that I had covered in a moment of what I now recognized as guilt, dressed up as generosity, and several other specific amounts, those I asked about directly, politely, with a suggested timeline. I did not receive a response to that letter for 11 days. When my son did come upstairs, Not to talk initially, but to get something from the garage. I was in the kitchen and I said his name and he stopped. He looked tired. He said he'd gotten the letter. I nodded. He said things had been hard. I said I knew. He said he didn't understand why I was doing this right now, and I said quietly, because I had rehearsed it in exactly that quietness, because I should have done it a long time ago, and I think we both know that. He didn't answer. He went to the garage and came back through without stopping. But something had changed in his face. Not anger. Something more uncomfortable than anger. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of it. My daughter-in-law was colder after that. She would speak to me in monosyllables when we crossed paths, and her silences in the common areas had a different texture. Harder. Pointed. I had expected this and I let it be what it was. I was not trying to win her over. I was not trying to punish her either. I was just no longer adjusting myself around her comfort. The children were, as they had always been, uncomplicated joy. My granddaughter, who was 6, would come upstairs sometimes in the morning and sit on my kitchen stool and tell me about her dreams. My grandson, who had just turned 4, called me by a name he had invented for me, Ro, because he couldn't manage the grandma words yet, and it hit me somewhere behind the sternum every time. Whatever happened between the adults, I was not going to lose those children. That was the thing I had to hold on to, and the thing that made all of it harder. February turned into March. The repayment conversation happened slowly and imperfectly. My son paid back one amount, a smaller one, and said he would work on the rest. It was not the plan I had outlined. I accepted it without performance. I was not going to extract compliance. I was going to set clear expectations and accept what came. What came was complicated. One Sunday morning, my son came upstairs alone. His wife had taken the kids to her mother's, he said. He made himself coffee at my counter, the way he had done since he was a teenager, and he sat at my kitchen table and he said, "Mom, I think I've been a really bad son." I did not rush to tell him that wasn't true. He needed to say it. And some of it was true. So I sat with him and I let him say it. He said he'd gotten so caught up in the stress of the move and the job and his wife's unhappiness about the move that he'd stopped seeing me as a person separate from the role I filled. He said that sounded terrible when he said it out loud. I said it did sound terrible and that I appreciated him saying it. He said he didn't know how we'd gotten to this. I said I thought we'd gotten here together, both of us, one small capitulation at a time, and that I was not without fault in it. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You shouldn't have had to spend Christmas alone." I said no, I shouldn't have. Nothing was fixed by that conversation. That is not how fixing works. But something opened. A window, maybe. The possibility of air. Spring came in its slow Ohio way. My daughter-in-law remained distant, and I remained civil. My son began stopping by my part of the house more. Small things. Checking if I needed anything from the hardware store. Sitting with me for 15 minutes before dinner sometimes. Incremental. Nothing dramatic. What did change dramatically was me. I started taking a watercolor class on Thursday evenings at the community center. I had not done anything like it in 30 years. I was terrible at first. Magnificently, embarrassingly terrible. The instructor, a retired school teacher herself with enormous earrings and a laugh you could hear from 3 rooms away, told me that not knowing how to do something was the most interesting place to be. I thought about that more than I expected to. I called my college roommate, a woman I had lost touch with in the way you lose touch with people when life gets full and loud. She was living in Savannah now. We talked for 2 hours. She said she was going to come visit in April. I said, "Please do." I started saying no in small ways. No, I wasn't available that Saturday. No, I wouldn't be covering that. No, that didn't work for me. At first, the word felt strange in my mouth, like a stone. After a while, it began to feel more like mine. The arrangement did not last forever. My son and daughter-in-law found a rental in a neighborhood about 20 minutes away. It happened in May, not dramatically. Not after a blow-up, just the natural end of a situation that had run its course. They moved out on a Saturday, and I helped them pack boxes the way mothers do. My daughter-in-law hugged me at the door, a real hug, which surprised me. She said thank you. I said you're welcome and meant it, and also meant something more than it, something I didn't say. When they drove away, I walked back through my house. All 4 bedrooms, my kitchen, my counters, my furniture in its right places. I went to the back door and stood there looking at the yard, the forsythia just starting to bloom at the corner of the fence, the old oak tree my husband had planted from a seedling 3 decades ago. Every spring, the same slow show of green. The house was quiet, but it was a different quiet than it had been 3 winters ago. Not the heavy quiet of waiting, the quiet of someone who had finally, after a long time, stopped shrinking. I thought about my granddaughter telling me her dreams at my kitchen stool. I thought about my grandson calling me Ro-Ro. I thought about the watercolor class, the terrible painting I was making of a sunflower, the instructor with the enormous earrings. I thought about my husband, who would have found all of this very interesting, who would have let me talk it out over 2 cups of coffee, who would have said something precise and kind at the end. I thought about the woman who had folded herself into the background of her own life for the better part of 3 years, and how strange it was that she had needed to be pushed this far to remember she did not have to. My son calls now on Sunday evenings, sometimes during the week. It is not perfect. Nothing about family is perfect. But I can tell when he calls that he is trying to see me, not just the role I play, and that is something. That is more than something. My friend from Savannah came in April, and we sat on my back porch with wine and talked about everything. The things we'd done, the things we wished we'd done differently, the long, slow education of getting older and what it costs and what it gives back. At some point, the conversation stopped, and we sat there in the dark and listened to the spring peepers down at the creek, and it was so ordinary and so good that I could have stayed in that moment the rest of my life. I did not solve anything, not completely. There is no complete solution to the complicated love between a parent and a child, no clean end to the ways we disappoint each other and repair each other and disappoint each other again. But I learned, in the late way you learn things you probably knew earlier and couldn't afford to act on, that loving someone does not require you to make yourself invisible, that honoring your family does not mean dishonoring yourself, that the most useful thing I could teach my son, even now, even at this age, was how a person holds on to their own dignity when everything is pulling at it. The forsythia is blooming again this spring. I can see it from the kitchen window while the kettle heats up in the morning. I have my coffee, and I have my Thursday watercolors, and I have the good quiet of a house that belongs entirely to me. And on Sundays, my son calls, and sometimes his voice is just his voice, not weighted with anything, just my son, just the boy who wore footed pajamas and believed I could fix everything. And those moments, small and ordinary as they are, feel like more than enough. There's a specific kind of pain that comes not from cruelty but from invisibility. My son did not hate me. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. He loved me the way people love things they have always had, without thinking much about what it would mean to lose them. That is not malice. But it is a kind of carelessness that compounds quietly over years until one day you are standing alone in your own kitchen looking at a pot roast you made for 6 people and you are the only one home. What I understand now on the other side of all of it is that what happened between us was not his fault alone and not mine alone. It was the result of a long chain of small choices. mine as much as his. Every time I said yes when I meant no, I was teaching him something. Every time I covered a bill without asking for accountability, I was teaching him something. Every time I folded myself out of the way so his life could be more comfortable, I was teaching him that my comfort did not require the same consideration. He learned the lesson I offered. Children do. That is the hard part to sit with, not the anger. Anger is easier, anger has a clear target, but the recognition that I was a participant in my own disappearing, that takes a particular kind of honesty to look at directly, and I was not always capable of it. I had to get very quiet and very still and let myself see it. What changed things for me was not a single dramatic moment. It was slower than that. It was Shirley setting down her pen and asking what I wanted my next 5 years to look like. It was driving home on icy roads in January, thinking about that question and having no ready answer. It was going to my desk that Tuesday night, not in rage but in clarity, and writing things down in the methodical way I had written lesson plans for 30 years. Because a teacher knows that if you do not know where you are trying to go, you cannot get anyone else there either. That is what I think of now when I think about what it means to be a decent person and a clear-headed one at the same time. Decency, real decency, does not mean endless accommodation. It means treating people honestly, including your own children, even when honesty is uncomfortable. It means valuing the relationship enough to tell the truth about what is happening to it. What I did when I mailed that note about the cell phone, when I wrote that letter about the money, was not unkind. It was the first genuinely honest thing I had done in that relationship in a long time. And then there is the matter of showing up for yourself in the practical sense, not collapsing under the weight of what has happened, not retreating. I took a watercolor class. I was terrible at it. I called a woman I had not spoken to in years. I started saying no, and then I started saying yes to different things that were mine. That is not a small act. For women who have spent decades making themselves smaller in service of people they love, showing up for yourself in the ordinary daily sense can feel like the most radical thing imaginable. I am not the same person I was 3 winters ago. I am quieter in some ways and louder in others. I know what I will and will not do. I know that love, real love, between a mother and a son, between any 2 people, has to be able to hold an honest conversation without falling apart. If it cannot, it was not as sturdy as it looked. The forsythia comes back every spring, so it turns out. Do I